How's it going, my friends? It's Carpo here, and I'd like to talk about photography. There are dozens of YouTube channels dedicated to photography. There are some very popular YouTubers who do nothing but photography. They review a variety of different cameras and lenses, and this video is not intended to tell you how to spend thousands of dollars on gear that you might not use. And so this video, I would say, hopefully from the non-photographer's standpoint, if you're not interested in taking pictures, this video won't interest you. And if you're a professional photographer, you'll probably laugh at me and say, what are you talking about? Micro Four Thirds are bullshit. Those cameras suck. And I had actually a list of notes, and I made a video about this about 2 weeks ago, and just never uploaded it because it was too long and drawn out. So I'd like to try to sum up exactly what I think about cameras as far as the most affordable setup that I've found for myself that still takes great pictures, and some reasons why I think Micro Four Thirds cameras are some of the most amazing cameras to hit the market. Now, let me start off by saying this. A lot of photographers will have you convinced that if you don't spend thousands of dollars on your camera and your lenses, that you can't take amazing photos. And that is complete nonsense. Any true photographer knows that if you take pictures of something, it doesn't matter what camera you use, it's about the angles that you use and, the presentation. Because some of the most amazing pictures ever taken, highly revered, were taken in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, long before we had DSLRs. Now, I really don't want to go too much into all the details of cameras. What I want to talk about specifically is Micro Four Thirds cameras. About 8 years ago, I picked this camera that I'm using up right now. It's a Panasonic Lumix G3. I loved it. I got it for a trade off Craigslist, and came with the lens that I'm using right now, which is a 14 to 42 millimeter lens. It can adjust, and it can get some pretty good shots, and since it's a mirrorless camera, it opens up these new possibilities that I didn't realize at the time when I bought it. Now, it has detachable lenses, but all the lenses for the Panasonic cost way too much, hundreds if not $1,000 or more. So I said, well, how am I going to get new lenses to experiment with? Then I learned about adapters, and this is where everything changed for me. I have these two lenses right here. This is the camera that I use. Now, the camera that I'm using right now to film is using that standard 14-42 lens that comes with it. It's a digital lens, and it does okay and makes decent videos. It doesn't have a whole lot of character. This lens right here, this is perhaps the best lens that I've ever used for photography, especially outdoors in the sun. And this is one that I got off of a camera that I ended up with two lenses and a free old Minolta camera that came in a bag maybe 15 years ago that somebody left behind at a house my mom lived in. And it came with these two lenses right here. Now, this is a MD Rocore X 45 millimeter lens. And it has a very wide aperture. Now, the aperture is how wide can you open up the inside of it to allow more light in. The wider the aperture, this is what they call a fixed lens or a dedicated lens. It means that it doesn't have it doesn't adjust focal length. It doesn't adjust, you can't adjust the depth of field. It doesn't have any, telephoto effects to it. Having a dedicated fixed lens is one of the most wonderful things for Micro Four Thirds camera, even something this small. In fact, it's my favorite lens, and I've tried a lot of them. This one right here is a Soligor 35 millimeter lens, and what I want to say is if you're ever going to adapt these lenses, you have to buy a ring adapter, which I believe it's Photosy is the company that makes most of the adapters that you can get, and they're between 10 and 20 bucks or more if they have electrical contacts. But this Soligor lens, for example, you have your focal setting, your focus, and you have your aperture, which you can open or close manually. A lot of the lenses don't have manual aperture control, especially in the later lenses. So, anyhow, I'm gonna get to that. I bought this maybe 10 years ago. It's a Vivitar telephoto lens. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just get an adapter for it that goes on my Micro Four Thirds camera. And it works, sure. But the additional focal length that it adds means that I can't get an infinite view, meaning I can't take pictures of the moon, I can't take pictures of anything ultra far away. In fact, the range of view on this is between 20 feet and like 60 feet, and beyond that I can't get anything. Well, I could probably work on that by getting a smaller ring adapter or messing around with it, but the other day I looked on Craigslist and I picked this up, and this is so exciting to me. Okay, so this whole bag with all the Minolta gear from 1985 or so. The guy had it up for $50 on Craigslist. And let me say before I forget, the reason you can use these lenses on a Micro Four Thirds is because the sensor is right there next to the front. So, for example, if you take a 35mm lens, and these are all things that I've learned over the years. I don't know shit about aperture or millimeters or how this works. The focal length is actually the distance between the convergence point, which is where the light converges in the lens, to the sensor itself. And this changes when you add an adapter. So if you have a 35mm lens and you add 35mm of adapter on there, then it makes it a 70mm lens, as far as I understand. Meaning that you're going to get a very, not only a very narrow range of, you know, a focal length, but it's a very small, they call it crop factor. You get a very small amount of picture within your, on your sensor. That doesn't seem to affect picture quality as long as you take good pictures. And so these adapters that I bought, I think I spent a total of like $40 for 3 different types of adapters. One was for Minolta, the MD lenses. One was for the Vivitar, which was kind of a failure at my point. But I talked this guy down to $40 for this whole setup, and I'm going to show you what I got. This right here is a Minolta 7000, and a Maxim 7000. This came out in the mid-80s. And at the time, this was the first autofocus camera available with detachable lenses especially, and it has actually electrical contacts in here which fit the lenses that it comes with. Apparently this was a really good camera for the time. And looking back, I couldn't afford good cameras back when I was younger, and I dreamed of doing photography. I had friends who, you know, the cameras I have behind me, like the Digital 8 and then the mini DV recorders. These are all ones I got at Goodwill for like $10-15 because they came out years later. So within that package, I got the camera and the case. For $40, I got the camera and the case. And then I got a Minolta flash, which it's a Maxim 2900 AF. And this flash works perfectly on the hot shoe on my own camera, so it just fits right in there. Boom, good to go. Flashes are cheap, but believe me, if you buy a new one, you're paying a fortune. And sure, they have all these digital features built in to the cameras now, but the question is, how many of them are you going to use? And are you going to spend all day long messing around with looking at your photos, adjusting the crop, adjusting the settings, adjusting the color, taking raw photos so you can do a lot of post-editing? If you're a professional photographer and you make your living completely off photography, I understand why you would spend every moment you can to try to perfect your pictures. But if you're just an average consumer, it's more important that you just take good pictures. So along with this kit and the camera and the lens and the bag, I also got this lens, which is a phenomenal lens. This is a 28 to 105 millimeter aspherical lens, and not only that, but it came with this. These are both Sigma lenses, and these lenses you can find for maybe 50 to 100 bucks or less, even sometimes online. But once again, you have to buy the adapter for it. And the Sigma lenses required a completely different adapter than I had before. But all of these came with lens caps, with hoods, with everything. And this right here, which is my baby, I just got this. It's a, let's see, what do we got? It's a Sigma zoom lens. It's an AF-APO 4.3 to 5.6, 75 to 300 millimeter. So this is a 300 millimeter lens, which allows you to take pretty close-up shots of wildlife. And here's what I'd like to add to this. Anybody who knows cameras is going to say, but you're going to get shake. And it's true. When you have a lens that focuses in close, you're going to get a lot of shake in your camera. And a lot of the modern lenses have image stabilization. You can get really good telephoto shots with even holding it still with your hands rather than using a tripod. But I have a tripod I use. And then I also have this magic little thing, which is called an intervalometer. It allows you to, it's like $10 online. It allows you to either take photos through the remote, so you don't have to touch the camera, so there's no shake. Or you can use it for time lapse and set up how often you want the camera to take shots. But another way around that is just to set your timer on your camera for 2 seconds, if you have that option, 2 to 10 seconds. And then you get the frame and the shot you want, and you hit the thing and wait for your camera to stabilize. Because with these long lenses and without stabilization, it's very hard to get a good shot. But here's the thing about Micro Four Thirds cameras. They have a digital sensor, which means that you can have a digital zoom on it. And your telephoto zoom means that you can get a 2 times, focus in on things. So if I push a little button on there, it'll focus in to a 2 times zoom, allowing me to do ultra detailed focus. That's something you cannot do on a DSLR, which are your standard cameras. So if you don't know anything about cameras, you might be asking, what's the difference? Well, a DSLR is a mirrored camera. That's why they're so much larger. Whereas a mirrorless camera is just as it sounds. It's mirrorless. They call it a Micro Four Thirds camera because the sensor is a 4:3 ratio. And a lot of the pictures and photos and movies people make are 16:9 or 3:2 ratio. None of that really matters. If you're a beginning photographer, and I say I'm a photographer because I take pictures. I'm taking tens of thousands of pictures. Does that mean I'm professional? No, but what does that really mean? And I've noticed that there's a huge ego surrounding how people, view photography and cameras and lenses. They're almost like, believe me, I'm a stereo fanatic. I love good music, and I love good stereos, good equipment, good speakers. After talking with so many people, even one of my videos is about speaker cables and how it doesn't matter over a certain point and a certain expense. And yet people continuously try to justify why they spent thousands of dollars on their cables. People, once they've spent money on something, it's really hard for them to step back and say, okay, this does give me a certain amount of benefit over a cheaper camera, but there is a point of diminishing returns. And if you're not aware of that, you're just going to have problems. Just like with stereos, you're going to spend thousands of dollars on a stereo system, but if you spend 20 grand on a stereo, you'll get a phenomenal stereo over something that costs, say, $200. But if you spend 40 grand on a stereo, even though you spent twice as much, you're going to get diminishing returns because there's only so much better you can get as far as sound. And with photography, it's no different. You can do everything you want in post-production, which is something I honestly, as an amateur photographer, have never done. I've never messed with post-production. I'm not that interested. I've never even used Photoshop because I enjoy just taking natural photos in natural light, and situations the way I enjoy them. And so I guess I should probably put my money where my mouth is and put up some of my pictures here at the end. Maybe I'll make a slideshow out of this, or maybe not. Maybe it'll just be about cameras in general. But, like I've said, the excuses that I've heard of having a really fancy camera is like longer battery life. I've seen huge monstrous batteries that people wear around their necks on their cameras. And here's my little battery, which I can get about 2 to 3 hours of video out of this, or hundreds, if not 1,000 pictures. And tiny battery, very lightweight. The camera weighs almost nothing. You can carry this with a little tiny Minolta lens, you know, in one hand, in a pocket almost, and size doesn't always matter, you know, when it comes to cameras. And I'm saying this because, as I said at the beginning, I know people will think spending more money is going to equal better pictures, but some of the greatest pictures ever taken were taken back in, you know, what, dozens of years ago, way before digital cameras. And digital took a long time to catch up to film. And film cameras are still better. In my opinion, you still get better pictures from a 35mm Minolta camera with real film in it and an old school Rocore lens, you know. That's my opinion. There's a certain subtlety. It's almost like listening to vinyl as opposed to MP3s. There's something there you can't quite define. You know there's science behind it and a reason why it looks better or sounds better, but, you know, it's so funny to me how many debates there are in the photography community over what looks good and how to get good pictures. The only thing I'd like to, like I said, it adds a lot. The depth of field changes, the focal length changes when you add these extensions onto a 4/3 camera. And it's interesting because there's so many different types of lenses that you can try out, and they tend to really focus in close. I mean, the crop factor is, you know, it's intense. If I were to use one of these lenses from here, I could never film myself. Whenever I've used these a couple times. I've used this little lens right here, this Minolta lens that I've used, this Rocore lens. I've used this maybe a dozen times on my videos on YouTube. Every single time I use it, people comment on, wow, do you have a new camera? It looks amazing. And the reason for that is focal length. The camera that I'm using has to sit back at least twice as far to get the same width of frame, right? And because of that, the what they call the bokeh, which is from a Japanese word meaning blur. It's like this. Everybody knows, some people, if you're not into photography, you don't know, but you know when you see it, a picture which has a really strong black background blur and the person stands out immensely. Or perhaps they're focused on the background and there's some foreground blur on some leaves or a plant or whatever. It gives a depth of field and it gives you the idea that you're in the picture. This is the one place where cameras stand out from, I should say, professional or higher quality cameras stand out from, say, cell phones, because cell phones take amazing pictures these days. We can't deny it. There is a way to get bokeh out of it by zooming in with your cell phone, but that's a digital zoom. You can't get a long zoom. So, in other words, the longer that you focus in, the more you zoom, and the longer distance between your subject and the background or foreground, you're going to get more bokeh. And it's going to give you that feel of three-dimensionality. And I say that because anybody can take phenomenal pictures if they just take the time to sit back and look at things from the perspective of the human eye. The reason why 35mm is a popular size is because that focal length is natural to the human eye. But of course, that's a 90-degree field of vision. When we have two eyes open, we have up to 180 degrees. So it's slightly different, but it's really interesting to see how these different lenses put out different pictures. And it really, the last thing I'd like to add is when you do this, you have to do everything manually. That means that you turn on your camera, you have to eliminate all the autofocus options, and you have to focus manually, and you have to set the aperture manually. Sometimes you'll get overexposed, it'll be too bright. Sometimes it's the aperture's too closed, which will just mean that your pictures might blur. You might be harder to get a good photo. It really puts into perspective how difficult it is to take a good picture and spend the time to really make sure it's done right. And I really enjoy taking photos like that, because I used to take pictures of everything, just save everything. Now I tend to delete at least half the pictures I take before I ever put them on my computer. And then I name them and I properly sort them into the categories I want, because sure, I'd love to take pictures and do it, and make money off of it, but I just do it because I enjoy it. and I'm more of a videographer, I guess, than a photographer, but I'm still, I don't buy into the, there are systems that work. There are patterns and methods that are time tested and proven to work for photographers and people who make videos. And if for somebody who can't afford, a lot of fancy stuff, then you just kind of have to work with what you have. So the Lumix that I have here, this Lumix G3, came out 10 years ago or more, and I think I bought the body to replace the one that broke, the battery compartment, and it just stopped working. I used this for years, and I bought the exact same model so I could use my existing lens and other lenses and adapters. And it was $125 just for the body. You can get one for $200 if you look around. And when you think about spending $2,000 or $12,000 on cameras and lenses, you ask yourself, how am I going to repay myself for that? Is it really worth it? And if that's your only career and you're making a full living off of it, go for it. Buy the best of. I don't blame you. But I really have a hard time understanding the justification for people thinking that 4/3 cameras aren't just amazing as far as an option. Something to carry, something smaller, something that's more affordable, and something that can do just as good a job as a DSLR mirrored camera. And the truth is, you can't use these lenses on mirrored cameras. Some of them you can, but it's not the same as a 4/3 because of the lens distance and the focal length. So, on final notes, DSLRs tend to click more and make more noise, and I've heard people say that. It seems like a trivial thing, but if you're a photographer for like weddings or something where you need to be quiet, going click, 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 click can get quite annoying. So having a small mirrorless can allow you to take just as good of photos. A lot of people have expressed concern over the fact that they don't get good depth of field using a micro 4/3, which is complete nonsense. If you add an adapter to any lens, if you just, increase that focal length, you can actually get amazing bokeh and amazing depth of field out of a simple camera. So, what else do I have to share? I've got telescope lenses, I've got a wide angle lens, but none of this shit I ever use. I even got a book, Minolta, How to Select and Use Minolta Maxim SLR Cameras, and they came with the package that I bought there. But really the only thing I wanted out of it here was the tele lens, because I like to do wildlife photography when I'm out and about. And if I'm just doing video and just filming the family, I'll just use this little Sony Handycam. It's phenomenal. It's only 6 megapixels, but I got it for $50. It's got a 20 times, zoom. Phenomenal little unit for just on the beach. Pop a little tripod on there. But I still love the view of, film. In fact, before I go, I'd like to show you this. This is a Sony Digital Mavica. This is one of the first digital cameras to come out. It has a beautiful lens on it. It used to have a lens cap, but I cannibalized it. But it has one of the first flip out lenses where you can actually see yourself, and it's even adjustable. It's got little buttons on the side. It's got little buttons all over the thing. But here's the part that really gets me. Pull this down. Pop. This digital camera takes a floppy disk, and you can get maybe 4 or 5 pictures on a floppy disk before you have to put a new one in. And you might get about 5 seconds of video. It's pretty interesting how far cameras have come, and I only say that because it's just funny to me how there are always these little fan clubs that form around products, whether it be stereo equipment, automobiles, or cameras, where people think, I have the fanciest, I have the best, therefore I take the greatest pictures. And really people just, there's nothing original. There's nothing new under the sun. All pictures and textures, and they're all based on something that we previously knew was appealing to the eye. And that beauty isn't always in the eye of the beholder when it comes to these scenes and patterns that, we're just kind of drawing on what people have done from the past. No photography is new, because you're taking a picture of something that already exists. So just consider that. And also, I guess the main point here would be to inspire people who wanted to get into photography, but just think that it's just too expensive to get a good camera. Total nonsense. A couple $100 and a Craigslist run, and you could get a phenomenal camera that works just fine for your needs. Assuming your needs are like my needs. So, that's all I got. And thanks for listening. Hope you gained something off of it. I really just wanted to share my beautiful, my phenomenal thought with the beauty of 4/3 micro 4/3 systems, because I've never had a DSLR. I've never been able to afford a nice camera. But since I got this thing by chance, and at the time knew nothing about 4/3 or the difference, I'm really glad I made the decision I did, because it does the job for me. So, be well. Peace out. Talk to you later.